Shalom. This week's Torah portion is Parashat Lech Lecha, literally go for yourself, beginning in Genesis chapter 12. Our portion introduces us to the illustrious career of Avraham Avinu, our forefather Abraham. We are taught that while he was still a young boy, Abraham recognized the one God all on his own, despite living in an environment that was completely dominated by idolatry. He rebelled against the idolatrous norms of his contemporary society. He stood up against his own family, destroying his father's idols. He clashed with the ruling authorities and was even condemned to death on account of his faith. He was thrown into a fiery furnace by King Nimrod, only to miraculously emerge from that furnace unharmed. Our portion opens with God's instructions to Avraham, at this point still known as Avram, to leave his birthplace and to travel to the land of Canaan, where, God tells him, he will make him into a great nation and bless him, and he himself will become a blessing to the entire world. Almost immediately after arriving at this divinely directed destination, Abraham was forced to descend down to Egypt on account of a famine in the land. Everything that Abraham encountered, all the detailed adventures and misadventures of his life that Torah records and shares with us, they all hold deep life lessons for us to learn. In Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, chapter 5, we learn that Abraham was tested 10 times by God in order to prove his faith and righteousness. Each of these tests presented challenges to Abraham's trust in God. These 10 trials, as they are known, reflect Abraham's unwavering faith and commitment to God, serving as a model of spiritual resilience and loyalty for all future generations. Each test highlighted a different aspect of his relationship with God, strengthening his legacy as the father of belief in one God and the founder of the nation of Israel. According to traditional interpretation, the first trial was leaving his homeland to go to an unknown land. The second trial was facing a severe famine after arriving in Canaan, forcing him to go down to Egypt. The third trial was when Sarah was taken into Pharaoh's palace. The fourth trial was Abraham entering into a dangerous war, the War of the 4 and 5 Kings, risking his life to rescue his nephew Lot and to uphold justice. This war is the subject of chapter 14 of our portion, where it's described in great detail. First, let's try to understand the war according to this simple level of meaning, according to the verses. The narrative centers around the coalition of 4 powerful eastern kings, led by Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, who had subjugated 5 local kings from the region of the Jordan Valley. The 5 local kings, including the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah, served Chedorlaomer and paid him tribute for 12 years. In the 13th year, the 5 kings rebelled, refusing to continue their subjugation. According to Midrash, the rebellion lasted for 13 years, and in the 14th year, Chedorlaomer rallied the other 3 kings and launching a military campaign to suppress that rebellion. The battle was fought in the region of the Dead Sea, resulting in a decisive victory for the 4 kings, who also defeat several other regional tribes just in order to demonstrate their dominance. The 4 kings reach the valley of Siddim, where they confront the 5 kings of the Jordan Valley. The 4 kings overwhelm the 5 kings, the defeated kings flee, and some of their forces fall into tar pits in the valley of Siddim, while others escape to the mountains. The victors enter the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, plundering all their possessions. A survivor of the battle escapes and informs Avram, who is dwelling by the terebinths of Mamre, that his nephew Lot, who had been living in Sodom, is taken captive. It's ostensibly Lot's capture that brings Avraham into the conflict, forcing him to intervene. Avraham gathers his 318 men of his household and sets out to rescue Lot. Avraham divides his forces and launches a surprise attack at night on the forces of the 4 kings near Dan. He chases them as far as a place called Chovah, north of Damascus, decisively defeating them. Avraham recovers all the goods taken by the 4 kings and rescues Lot, along with the other captives and the possessions from Sodom. Upon Avraham's return, the king of Sodom goes out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh. Melchizedek, king of Salem, who was actually Shem, the son of Noah, king of Jerusalem, called by the verse the priest of the Most High God, he brings out bread and wine and blesses Avraham, acknowledging God's role in Avraham's victory. Avraham gives Melchizedek the priestly gift of 1/10 of everything. The king of Sodom offers Avraham all the goods as a reward, requesting only the return of his people. Avraham refuses wealth from the king of Sodom, emphasizing that his mission and fortune come solely from God. However, he agreed to a portion that would be equally divided between the warriors and those who remained to guard the rear. Till now, this is the basic story of the war. But what was the point of this war, and what is its importance? What is its importance for us? What do we really understand about it? Because nothing is recorded by Torah unless it has eternal significance, and thus the detailed narrative describing this ancient battle is very unusual. Why does Torah dedicate so many detailed verses to the telling of this story? Clearly, this is an enigmatic episode with multiple layers of meaning, and there's so much more here than meets the eye. So open up your heart. To start with, this conflict is an archetype of the struggle between worldly power and spiritual truth. Kedar Laomer and his allies represent empires of self-centered earthly power, while Avraham, standing alone, embodies a principled resistance rooted in divine values. We see that he fights not to gain, but to rescue. And deeper still, we know Avraham as the true man of kindness, as demonstrated in next week's Torah portion of Vayera by his singular attribute of hospitality, going to great lengths to feed guests despite the pain of his circumcision. Avraham's entire essence was powered by the attribute of kindness. Regarding his participation in this war as well, Avraham's actions are a manifestation of kindness. Avraham exemplifies a kindness that isn't passive but assertive, causing him to intervene for the sake of his nephew and for justice itself. He is a spiritual revolutionary who rejects passivity in the face of oppression, choosing to act decisively to redeem the victim of injustice. He engages with the world, even taking up arms for the cause of sanctifying God's name by standing up for justice in a world gone wrong. And even on the simplest level of understanding, Avraham's involvement in this war was not incidental. His entering into the battle revealed not only a commitment to justice, but a deeply rooted spiritual heroism. Avraham is the quintessential man of faith, but he's also the man of action, whose mission is to reclaim and restore divine presence in a world seemingly uninterested in God, a world dominated by materialism and power. His victory in this war demonstrated that divine providence is intimately involved in human affairs. Entering a conflict which was essentially the First World War with only a small force, Avraham embodies divinely empowered spiritual strength, determined to overpower physical might. Avraham's actions also signal the beginning of a redemptive process. This incident marks the first instance of Israel asserting its presence among the nations, foreshadowing its divinely mandated mission to elevate and transform the world. And in an example of Torah's simultaneous conveyance of multiple levels of reality, the Ramban explains that this war is also a foreshadowing of the future exiles which will befall Israel, Abraham's descendants, throughout history, foretelling Israel's resilience against empires that will arise later. Just as Abraham defeated all the kings, so too will Israel overcome all who rise against it and attempt to destroy it. This understanding sees each of the four kings as representing the four primary forces or kingdoms of exile, which exert control over the material world throughout the different periods of Israel's history: Babylon, Media, Greece, and Edom. Thus, this battle between Avraham and the kings becomes the prototype for the pattern of conflict in Jewish history. A small, divinely inspired force standing against much larger oppressive powers. The wars of Israel recorded in the Torah, the battles fought by the Maccabees, and even more recent struggles of Jewish survival over the centuries are all manifestations of this root narrative. But now open up your heart in the deepest way as we go deeper. In his classic work, Tzidkat HaTzadik, the famed Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin reveals a unique principle in Torah study. He teaches that the first time Torah mentions something, that instance is the root, the source of that concept on a spiritual level, and it contains its inherent secrets for every generation. Reb Tzadok teaches that we are constantly revisiting these root concepts throughout each generation's experiences. This principle most certainly has profound implications for our present study. This battle of the 4 and 5 kings in the ancient land of Canaan, truly the First World War, is the first instance of war recorded by Torah. As the foundational root of warfare in the Torah, this battle encapsulates not only the literal concept of war, but also its deeper spiritual dimensions and implications. According to Reb Tzadok's revelation, this epic battle, the first of its kind, establishes war as more than a physical confrontation. It's powered by a spiritual struggle. Avraham was drawn into it to rescue Lot and defend his mission of teaching the oneness of God, and thus the Torah's first war becomes a paradigm for the eternal struggle between forces aligned with divine purpose and those resistant to it. This battle foreshadows the dual nature of the conflicts that humanity will continuously face. Battles wherein the supposed material objectives are intertwined with much more at stake on the spiritual dimension. But now open up your heart deeper still. In chapter 14 and verse 13 we read, "Then there came the refugee and told Avram, the Ivri, about the capture of his nephew, and when he heard that his relative was taken captive, he armed 318 disciples of his household and pursued them as far as Dan." So Avraham is well known in Jewish tradition by this unique title, the Ivri, which one will generally find translated in most Bibles as the Hebrew. Indeed, his descendants are known as Ivrim, and their language is called Ivrit, Hebrew. On a simple level of meaning, itself not so simple, this word Ivri is connected to the word Aver, meaning one side, indicating that Abraham came from the other side of the Euphrates River. This geographic distinction parallels his spiritual mission as the other, who introduced belief in the one true God against a backdrop of worldwide, widespread idolatry. Truly, as our sages aptly put it, the whole world was on one side and Avraham was on the other. The designation of the Ivri marks him as a figure set apart, a trailblazer standing on the other side of prevailing ideologies and values. But here's the amazing thing, so really open up your heart. Besides this reference here in our portion, this term Ivri appears in numerous narratives throughout the Tanakh to describe certain individuals. Some notable instances include Potiphar's wife, referring to Joseph as Ivri when accusing him of attempting to assault her in Genesis 39. Pharaoh speaking to the Hebrew midwives in the first chapter of Exodus, and the law of the Hebrew servant in the book of Exodus, who shall serve for 6 years and go out in the 7th year, and the runaway prophet Jonah identifying himself as an Ivri to the sailors aboard the ship. But the intriguing thing is that while this is Abraham's personal moniker, and the title was bequeathed to his descendants who carry out his legacy, yet here in our verse in chapter 14 and verse 13, this is the one and only verse throughout the entire Bible in which Avram himself is called Ivri. As we've just mentioned, afterwards the term gets widespread use for his descendants, but our portion's narrative of Avraham's involvement in the war is the only instance in the entire Torah in which Torah uses it in connection with Avram himself. Clearly, during the war, this aspect of Avram's identity as Ivri, as one who is set apart, distinct and uncompromising in his belief in the one God, it becomes critical as he chooses to stand alone against powerful kings. But why is the context of this war the only instance in which we find Avram referred to as this important title, the Ivri? Applying Rabbi Tzadok Cohen's principle that the first occurrence of a term in the Torah establishes its fundamental meaning, the fact that Ha'ivri first appears in the context of Avraham's involvement in the war informs us that the essence of being Ivri is tied to standing up for divine purpose against adversity in a hostile environment. Through his identity as Ha'ivri, Avraham demonstrates that although he is the outsider, he's willing and ready to confront the world's most powerful forces for the sake of his principles. And by using Ha'ivri in relation to Avram here and only here, Torah emphasizes that Avram's actions were totally focused on the struggle between truth and falsehood, between light and darkness. This singular mention sets Avraham aside as a spiritual warrior, stepping into a hostile world armed with his unshakable faith, embodying what it means to be on the other side of worldly power and ego. And it sets a precedence for his descendants and eternally calls upon them that they must always strive to uphold faith and justice, even when isolated. But deeper still, we can also understand Ha'ivri as embodying the idea of being a bridge between the divine and worldly realms. The title teaches us that Avraham is crossing from a higher realm into the practical realm, where he takes responsibility for justice on earth, as Hashem himself declares in next week's Parashat Vayera, in verse 19 of chapter 18. "For I have loved him, for he commands his children and his household after him that they keep the way of Hashem, doing charity and justice." Just as we mentioned that Avraham's chesed, his kindness, was not passive, in the same way, Avraham's intervention shows that holiness is not meant to be detached from the world. Rather, it has to integrate into this world and elevate worldly affairs. The term ha'ivri represents Avraham's ability to bridge these realms, standing on the other side, yet engaging with the physical world to reveal God's presence even within conflict. But now, please open your heart deeper than ever. Until now, we've really been speaking about the War of 4 and 5 Kings on the simplest level of meaning. But the deepest truth of ancient wisdom, revealed by our sages as given over in the early work Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, opens up a new dimension of understanding for us, because here we are taught that this whole war was an elaborate setup. It was a strategic trap specifically designed to eliminate Avraham and to extinguish his revolutionary mission of spreading the idea of monotheism. The kings were not merely vying for power over one another, but were unified by a deeper agenda to kill Avraham. This entire campaign of this war was merely a subterfuge, a deliberate trap to ensnare Avraham in order to assassinate him. This king Amraphel, who figures in our story, appears elsewhere in the Bible under a different name, none other than Nimrod. The name Amraphel is a code. It's a contraction of the Hebrew words that state he ordered Avraham to be thrown into the fiery furnace as punishment for his belief in the one Creator. Avraham was seen as a threat to the prevailing world order dominated over by Nimrod and the other powerful rulers. His teaching the truth of the one God challenged not only their authority, but also the very foundations of their fear-based societies, which thrived on the dependency of the masses that they controlled through their polytheistic cults and militaristic hierarchies. Midrash tells us that the kings were aware that Abraham's spiritual influence, his teachings of the one true God, were a threat to the power structure of their fear-mongering dictatorships and the military-industrial complex that they had built up. And they were concerned that their power would be undermined. They feared the consequences of his success, and they saw him as someone who was bringing about a new divine order that would dissolve their authority. And it was no coincidence that Lot just happened to be living in the area near the battlefield, and he was not captured at random. Capturing Lot was simply a ploy, as the kings knew full well that Abraham would come to his nephew's rescue and provide them the opportunity to assassinate him. This plot signifies a calculated attempt to extinguish the emerging light of belief in one God at its source, Abraham himself. Totalitarian figures like Amraphel / Nimrod wield authority by force and keep people dependent on and subservient to transient material earthly powers that are not powers at all. Abraham's mission posed a direct threat by promoting faith in an unseen, ethical, eternal God who required no earthly intermediaries. This shift would render Nimrod and the other rulers obsolete. Abraham, as the archetypal Ivri, is the one who crosses over to bring a new belief system to the entire world. The kings conspired to eliminate him, not because he was simply just another spiritual teacher among many, but a spiritual warrior revolutionary, a radical disruptor, poised to shift humanity's orientation from a fragmented worldview to an all-encompassing divine unity that would change the course of history. So yes, Abraham is a disruptor of political correctness, of convention, of the powerful, immoral, and manipulative establishment. With courage, with resilience, and with integrity, he rises up to sanctify God's name in a godless world. His mission to challenge and upend the corrupt world is timeless, and the implications for our time are staggering. His story sets a precedent for every individual that needs to be internalized. He calls us to action, to defend our beliefs, our spiritual values, when we see that the prevailing social and political or cultural systems encourage a godless, fragmented, power-driven worldview. Abraham teaches us that spiritual progress requires confronting opposition. So open up your heart deeper than ever before in your whole life. Here we are, learning about the first war mentioned in the Torah, exploring the implications of our forefather Abraham's involvement, while his children in the land of Israel are at war for over a year now, fighting for their survival and opposed by a hostile and unaccepting world. Abraham intervened in the War of the Kings, a fabricated war that was designed to destroy him but did not succeed. and his involvement in deliverance at Hashem's hand teaches us that spiritual dedication will draw opposition from forces of evil, resistant to change, but that the truth of the one God ultimately prevails.